is God's roadmap for Israel and the church? These short Q&As will help guide you on your way. Why is there still a Palestinian refugee problem 73 years after the War of Independence?
The Nakba for Palestinians has continued to this day, a catastrophe inflicted by their own leadership. There are 7 million Palestinians classified as refugees today. You wouldn't recognize some of them as such. They might be your neighborhood grocers. But 1.5 million of them continue to live in refugee camps in the Middle East. This is a fascinating and very sad chapter in the story of the conflict. But before unpacking that one, I'd like to share a Jewish chapter that is often omitted. For centuries, Jews have lived in large numbers, but as a minority, in every Middle Eastern country: Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and Iraq. Jews have lived in Iraq, for example, since the Babylonian exile in 586 before Common Era. A minority of them returned to Israel after 70 years, but most stayed and put down roots. Beginning in 1941, these Middle Eastern nations began pressuring and persecuting their Jews and confiscating their property. This persecution accelerated with the formation of the new Jewish state. Between 1941 and 1948, 600,000 Middle Eastern Jews fled their homes for Israel, and another 260,000 fled to Europe and North America. Remarkably, there are no Jewish refugees today from among these 860,000 who were forced out of Arab lands. Zero. On the other hand, today there are 7 million Palestinian refugees. What gives, you say? How can that be? First of all, the Jewish refugees were quickly settled in Israel, North America, and Europe. It was difficult, with people living in tents in Israel for a couple of years with minimal diet, but they did it. Israel's Jewish population doubled with the absorption of these refugees. The unfortunate Arab refugees, however, who moved in the other direction from Israel to the Middle Eastern Arab nations, became political pawns of their own leaders. Refugee camps were set up in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, and the West Bank. As I mentioned, 1.5 million Palestinians still live in 58 refugee camps. Many policies of the host countries have worked against their being able to get on with their lives. Jordan is the only one that offers citizenship. Palestinian refugees are typically barred from entering desirable occupations. And now, here is an important fact. Of these 7 million Arab refugees from the 1948 war, there are only 10 to 20,000 from the original 1948 group still living. But sadly, the United Nations created 2 special policies for refugees from this conflict and this conflict only. Firstly, the descendants of the actual refugees also received refugee classification, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. For no other refugee group is this the case. In addition, you only had to have arrived in Palestine in 1946 to get refugee status. In other conflicts, you would have needed to be displaced from a generational home. Finally, a special agency was created for this group, UNRWA, which has far more employees than the regular UN agency, the UNHCR, which must care for refugees from all other conflicts and causes. I hope you are seeing the politicization of this conflict by Palestinian leaders, by leaders of other Arab lands, and even by the international community in general, as represented by the UN. The tragedy of all this, the catastrophe, is that it is the Palestinian people who are paying the price in instability, poverty, and hopelessness. Israel is not their enemy. Their enemy is a corrupt and misguided leadership. To get the facts of this situation in a very simple format, we offer a guide called Israel 101, created by the advocacy group Stand With Us. You can get it on our website. With wisdom, we can stand with God's purposes for both Israelis and Palestinians.